The ancient grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2 in the morning, its deep chimes echoing through the cavernous marble foyer of the Blackwood mansion. Elena Moretti's eyelids drooped as she polished the same spot on the mahogany side table for what felt like the 3rd time. Her slender fingers, raw from hours of cleaning, moved mechanically across the surface. 6 consecutive days of double shifts had left her body running on nothing but determination and 3 cups of lukewarm coffee. "Just finish this wing, then you can go home," she whispered to herself, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. The temporary cleaning agency had been clear. This last-minute job at the Blackwood estate paid triple the normal rate, but it had to be completed before the owner returned from his business trip abroad. Money like that wasn't something Elena could afford to pass up, not with her daughter Sophia's school fees due next week and the rent already 2 weeks late. The mansion was unlike anything Elena had ever seen, sprawling, opulent and oddly empty of personal touches. Rumors about its owner, Dominic Blackwood, swirled throughout the city. Some said he was merely a reclusive business magnate with investments spanning continents. Others whispered darker theories about his family's connections to organized crime dating back generations. Elena had learned long ago not to concern herself with gossip or the private affairs of the wealthy. Clean their homes, remain invisible, collect the paycheck, that was the unspoken contract. A framed photograph on the mantelpiece caught her attention, the only personal item she'd encountered in the entire West Wing. Elena's curiosity got the better of her professionalism. Setting down her cloth, she approached the crystal frame. It held an image of a stern-faced older man standing beside a younger version of who she assumed must be Dominic Blackwood. The resemblance was striking, the same sharp jawline, penetrating dark eyes and commanding presence. Neither man smiled. Suddenly, Eleanor's vision swam. The photograph blurred before her eyes as exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Her legs wobbled, and she stumbled back toward one of the plush leather sofas that dominated the center of the room. "Just 5 minutes," she murmured, sinking into the impossibly soft leather. 5 minutes to rest my eyes, then I'll finish." The weight of 6 sleepless nights descended upon her all at once. Despite her best efforts, her eyelids fluttered closed, and within moments, Elena Moretti was fast asleep in the home of the most dangerous man in the city. Dominic Blackwood dismissed his security detail with a curt nod as he entered his estate, through the private garage entrance. The negotiations in Milan had concluded 2 days earlier than expected, and all he wanted was the solitude of his home. At 36, Dominic had spent over a decade transforming his family's questionable business interests into legitimate enterprises while maintaining the power and influence the Blackwood name commanded. It was exhausting work, constantly balancing on the knife edge between 2 worlds. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor as he moved through the kitchen, loosening his tie. He paused at the wet bar in the main living room, pouring 2 fingers of scotch before noticing something unusual, a half-empty bottle of cleaning solution and a rag left on one of his side tables. Dominic frowned. The cleaning service was supposed to be finished hours ago. That's when he saw her. A woman was curled up on his sofa, fast asleep. Her work uniform identified her as part of the cleaning crew, but her presence at this hour was completely unacceptable. Dominic's first instinct was to call security, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the dark circles under her eyes, or the way her hands, even in sleep, bore the marks of someone who worked relentlessly. He approached silently, studying her face. She couldn't be older than 30, with features that hinted at Italian heritage not unlike his own. There was something strangely familiar about her, though he was certain they'd never met. Dominic was not a man who forgot faces. A small worn leather wallet had fallen from her pocket onto the floor. He picked it up, his curiosity overriding his usual respect for privacy. The ID inside read Elena Moretti, alongside a photograph that didn't do justice to her striking features. Behind the ID was a small school photograph of a young girl with the same chestnut hair and determined expression. Dominic replaced the wallet on the side table, his mind working quickly. The name Moretti triggered something in his memory, a connection he couldn't quite place. He took a seat in the armchair opposite the sofa, sipping his scotch and watching the sleeping woman with increasing interest. "Mr. Blackwood!" A startled voice broke the silence. His house manager, Richard, stood in the doorway, clearly alarmed. "I didn't expect you until—" His eyes landed on Elena's sleeping form. "I do apologize, sir. The agency assured me all staff would be gone by midnight. I'll have her removed immediately." "No," Dominic said quietly, surprising himself with the response. "Let her sleep." Richards looked confused but knew better than to question his employer's decisions. "As you wish, sir. Shall I prepare your usual nightcap in the study?" "That won't be necessary. I'll be retiring shortly." Dominic dismissed the man with a wave, his eyes never leaving Elena. Once alone again, he pulled out his phone and sent a text to his head of security. "Background check Elena Moretti." Within minutes, information began flooding his secure messaging app. Dominic's expression darkened as he read through the details of Elena's life. Single mother, working 3 jobs, husband died in a construction accident 4 years ago, struggling with medical debts. The construction company responsible for her husband's death, Westfield Development, was a subsidiary that Dominic had acquired last year and was in the process of restructuring. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His company now owned the business responsible for this woman's widowhood. Dominic Blackwood was not a man accustomed to feeling guilt, but something about this coincidence felt like fate. As dawn approached, Elena stirred, her eyes fluttering open slowly before widening in horror as she realized where she was. She bolted upright, gasping when she saw Dominic sitting across from her. "I'm so sorry," she blurted, rising quickly. "I didn't mean to. I was just resting for a moment. I'll finish cleaning right away." "Sit down, Miss Moretti," Dominic said, his voice calm but commanding. Elena froze, sinking back onto the sofa. "How do you know my name?" Instead of answering, Dominic leaned forward. "I have a proposition for you." "A proposition?" Elena repeated, confusion evident on her face. "A mutually beneficial arrangement," he continued, his dark eyes intense. "I find myself in need of a wife. Temporarily, of course, for business reasons. 6 months, perhaps a year at most. In exchange, I'll ensure your daughter's education is fully funded through university, your debts cleared, and a generous monthly stipend for your time." Elena stared at him in disbelief. "You want to marry me, a complete stranger? That's insane." "Perhaps," Dominic conceded with the hint of a smile. "But I assure you, this would be a business arrangement only. You'd have your own suite of rooms, complete privacy, and would only be required to appear as my wife at certain functions. After our arrangement concludes, you and your daughter would be financially secure for life." "Why me?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There must be countless women who would jump at the chance to marry Dominic Blackwood, even temporarily." Something flickered in his eyes, a vulnerability so brief Elena thought she might have imagined it. "Because you have no connections to my world or my enemies. Because you need this as much as I do. And because," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "I owe you a debt you don't even know exists." The grandfather clock chimed 6 times, marking the morning hour. Elena's mind raced. This offer was madness, something out of a bizarre dream. Yet the thought of Sophia's future being secure, of finally escaping the crushing weight of debt that had followed her since Marco's death. "I need time to think," she said finally. Dominic nodded, rising to his feet with fluid grace. "You have until tomorrow. My driver will pick you up at 7 in the evening for dinner where we can discuss the details, should you be interested." He handed her a business card with only a phone number embossed in silver. "Call this number when you decide." As Elena gathered her cleaning supplies with trembling hands, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just been offered a deal with the devil himself. What she didn't know was that Dominic Blackwood had recognized something in her sleeping form, a chance at redemption he hadn't known he was seeking, and neither of them realized that the shadows gathering at the edges of Dominic's carefully constructed world were about to draw them both into a dangerous game, where their temporary arrangement would become their only chance at survival. Elena stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror of her small apartment. The circles under her eyes had only deepened after a day spent agonizing over Dominic Blackwood's outlandish proposal. She had called in sick to her morning shift at the diner, something she rarely did, needing time to think without the constant demands of customers and her hovering manager. "Mum, are you okay?" Sophia's voice called through the door. At 9 years old, her daughter was already too perceptive, too aware of the weight Elena carried. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Elena replied, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. "Just getting ready for a meeting tonight." She opened the door to find Sophia standing there, already dressed in her school uniform, her backpack slung over one shoulder. With her dark curls and serious eyes, she looked so much like Marco that it sometimes took Elena's breath away. "Is Mrs. Jenkins still coming to stay with me?" Sophia asked, her expression making it clear she wasn't thrilled about their elderly neighbor's babysitting services, which typically involved knitting and outdated game shows. "Yes, but I left money for pizza," Elena said, pulling her daughter into a hug. "And I won't be too late." As she walked Sophia to school, Elena's mind returned to the business card burning a hole in her pocket. The logical part of her brain screamed that Dominic's offer was absurd, potentially dangerous, the kind of proposition no sensible person would consider. But the part of her that had been struggling to keep their heads above water for 4 years saw it differently. 1 year of her life in exchange for Sophia's security. Wasn't that exactly what she'd been doing anyway, just with far less compensation? Eleanor had spent the night researching Dominic Blackwood, finding carefully crafted press releases about his business empire, charity foundations, and occasional appearances at high society events, always with a different elegant woman on his arm, but never the same one twice. There were whispers on obscure forums about his family's history, allegations of connections to organized crime that were always promptly removed from any reputable site. The man was clearly powerful, wealthy, and meticulous about controlling his image. What did such a man want with someone like her? After dropping Sophia off, Eleanor walked to the local library and did something she'd been avoiding. She researched Westfield Development, the company responsible for Marco's death. The results made her blood run cold. 6 months after Marco's accident, Westfield had been acquired by Blackwood Enterprises. The timing couldn't be coincidental. When Dominic had said he owed her a debt, was this what he meant? By the time evening approached, Elena had made her decision. She would meet with Dominic, hear the full terms of his proposal, and then decide. She deserved answers, if nothing else. The Blacktown car arrived precisely at 7. The driver, a stoic man introduced as Frank, opened the door for her without comment. Eleanor had worn her only decent dress, a simple navy blue sheath that had been relegated to the back of her closet since Marco's funeral. The car wound through the city, eventually pulling up to an exclusive restaurant overlooking the harbor. Elena's nerves threatened to overwhelm her as Frank escorted her inside, past the curious glances of patrons clearly wondering who this ordinary-looking woman could be. Dominic stood as she approached the private dining room. In the soft lighting, he looked even more imposing than he had in his home, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and athletic frame. But it was his eyes that captured Elena's attention, dark, intense, and assessing her with an unreadable expression. "Ms. Moretti," he greeted her, pulling out her chair. "Thank you for coming." "I haven't agreed to anything," Elena said immediately, determined to establish that much. The corner of Dominic's mouth lifted slightly. "I appreciate directness. Shall we order first, or would you prefer to discuss business immediately?" "Business," Elena replied, ignoring the wine the server had already poured. "I want to know why you really chose me, and I want to know what Westfield Development has to do with it." Dominic's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps even respect. "You've done your research. My husband died because Westfield cut corners on safety equipment," Elena said, her voice low but steady. "The settlement they offered barely covered the funeral expenses. 6 months later, your company acquired them. So, yes, I've done my research." Dominic was silent for a long moment. "When I purchased Westfield, I was unaware of their negligent practices. Once I discovered the pattern of safety violations, I replaced the entire management team and implemented new standards." He paused. "I also instructed my legal team to review all previous incidents and provide appropriate compensation to affected families." "I never received any additional compensation," Elena said. "No," Dominic acknowledged. "Your case was flagged for personal review due to certain inconsistencies in the original investigation. I intended to handle it myself, but matters in Milan delayed my attention." His dark eyes met hers. "Finding you in my home seemed like more than coincidence." Eleanor's heart pounded. "So this marriage proposal, it's what? Guilt? Penance?" "Partially," Dominic admitted with surprising candor, "but also necessity. My family's business interests in Italy require certain traditions to be maintained. My grandfather's will stipulated that his shares of our oldest family holdings would only transfer to a married heir." He took a sip of wine. The deadline for that transfer is approaching. Without marriage, control of those interests would pass to my cousin Antonio, who lacks both the scruples and vision to maintain what I've built. So, you need any wife, and I happen to be convenient, Eleanor concluded. Not any wife, Dominic corrected. Someone without connections to my competitors or enemies, someone discreet, intelligent, and with her own motivations for maintaining our arrangement. His gaze intensified. Someone I can trust not to betray me, while also benefiting from the arrangement. The server returned with appetizers neither of them had ordered. Elena watched as Dominic exchanged a few words in fluent Italian with the man, who nodded respectfully before withdrawing. "You speak Italian," Elena observed. "My grandparents insisted," Dominic replied. "Your surname suggests you might as well?" "My father was from Naples," she acknowledged. "He taught me when I was young." Something about this detail seemed to please Dominic. "Then you understand the importance of family legacies." "I understand wanting to give my daughter a better life," Elena countered. "What exactly would this arrangement entail? Beyond the obvious." Dominic leaned forward slightly. "We would be legally married. You and your daughter would move into my home, where you would have your own suite of rooms. You would accompany me to certain business and social functions. We would present ourselves as a legitimate couple to the world." He paused. "After 1 year, we would quietly divorce. You would retain full financial support for yourself and your daughter, including her education through university." "And what about—" Elena hesitated, heat rising to her cheeks. "Physical expectations?" "There would be none," Dominic stated firmly. "This is strictly a business arrangement." Eleanor looked down at her untouched appetizer. "I would need guarantees, legal documents ensuring Sophia's future, regardless of what happens between us." "My lawyers are already preparing such documents," Dominic said smoothly. "You would have your own legal representation, of course, at my expense." The conversation paused as the main course arrived. Elena found herself studying Dominic as he spoke about the practical arrangements, how they would explain their sudden marriage, a whirlwind romance. What would be expected of her at social functions? Minimal. How much of the truth Sophia would need to know? Only that Dominic was helping them. There was something almost hypnotic about his confidence, the way he had clearly thought through every detail. Yet beneath his polished exterior, Elena sensed something else, a tension, perhaps even a vulnerability he kept carefully hidden. "Why not just find a loophole in your grandfather's will?" she asked suddenly. "Someone like you must have excellent lawyers." A shadow crossed Dominic's face. "My grandfather was exceptionally thorough. He valued family above all else and believed business without family ties would ultimately corrupt the soul. His will is ironclad." "And what about your soul, Mr. Blackwood?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Is it already corrupted?" For the first time that evening, Dominic appeared genuinely surprised by her question. He studied her for a long moment before answering. "Perhaps that's why I need this arrangement as much as you do, Miss Moretti." The dinner continued with discussion of logistics, when they would marry, within the week, how they would handle public appearances, what story they would tell the world. Throughout it all, Elena felt as though she were standing at the edge of a cliff, preparing to step into empty air. As the dessert plates were cleared away, Dominic produced a small blue velvet box. "For appearances," he explained, opening it to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond ring. "If you accept my proposal." Elena stared at the ring, the reality of what she was considering suddenly crystallizing. "I need to know one more thing," she said, looking up to meet his gaze. "The rumors about your family's connections to organized crime, are they true?" Dominic's expression remained impassive. "My grandfather and father operated in a different era, with different methods. I have spent the past decade legitimizing our interests and severing ties with the past." His eyes held hers. "But yes, the shadows of that history still occasionally touch my world. It's one of the reasons I need someone outside of those circles as my wife." "Would Sophia and I be in danger?" Eleanor asked bluntly. "As my wife, you would have the full protection of my security team," Dominic assured her. "In many ways, you would be safer than you are now." Eleanor thought of their apartment's broken lock, the sketchy neighborhood they couldn't afford to leave, the men who sometimes followed her home from late shifts at the diner. Safety had become a luxury she couldn't provide. With a deep breath, she extended her hand. I accept your proposal, Mr. Blackwood. On one condition, Sophia's happiness and well-being come first always. Dominic slid the ring onto her finger, his touch surprisingly gentle. I would expect nothing less, Ms. Moretti. His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. Or should I say, Mrs. Blackwood? Neither of them noticed the man sitting in the corner of the restaurant, watching their exchange with calculating eyes, before slipping out to make a phone call. A call that would set in motion events that would test their arrangement in ways neither could imagine. 3 months into her marriage of convenience, Eleanor stood on the balcony of the Blackwood mansion, watching as Sophia laughed with her new riding instructor on the grounds below. The transformation in her daughter had been remarkable, from a solemn child burdened by their circumstances to a vibrant, confident girl thriving in her new private school and surrounded by opportunities Elena could never have provided on her own. The wedding had been a small private affair at Dominic's estate, with only a handful of his most trusted associates present. To the outside world, their whirlwind romance was the stuff of fairy tales, the reclusive business magnate falling for an ordinary woman and marrying her within weeks of their meeting. The tabloids had a field day speculating about their relationship, some painting it as a heartwarming story of unexpected love, others insinuating more calculating motives on Elena's part. You're getting better at ignoring them, Dominic's voice came from behind her. Elena turned to find him standing in the doorway, his tie loosened after a long day of meetings. Despite living under the same roof for 3 months, their interactions remained largely formal, 2 actors playing their parts when required and retreating to their separate lives when not. Practice makes perfect, Elena replied with a small smile. Though I admit being called a gold-digging nobody in last week's society pages stung a bit. Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Cecilia Hampton has always had a vindictive streak. I declined her invitation to invest in her husband's latest venture. You don't need to explain, Eleanor said quickly. I knew what I was signing up for, but had she really? The reality of being Mrs. Dominic Blackwood had proven more complex than the straightforward business arrangement they'd discussed. There were the constant public appearances, the scrutiny of Dominic's social circle, the elaborate charade they maintained even with his household staff. Only Richards, his trusted house manager, and Frank, his head of security, knew the truth of their arrangement. The Milano delegation arrives tomorrow, Dominic reminded her, moving to stand beside her at the balcony railing. They'll be staying through the weekend. My grandfather's former associates are traditional in their expectations. They'll expect to see a united front. Elena nodded, unconsciously twisting the diamond ring on her finger. I've reviewed the dossiers your assistant provided. I won't embarrass you. You never have, Dominic said quietly, surprising her with what almost sounded like genuine appreciation. Their gazes met for a moment before Elena looked away, unsettled by the strange tension that sometimes surfaced between them, something neither of them had anticipated in their carefully negotiated arrangement. There's something else, Dominic continued, his tone shifting to business-like efficiency. Antonio will be with them. Elena stiffened. Dominic's cousin Antonio Blackwood had been a looming presence in their conversations from the beginning. The man who would have inherited the family's Italian holdings had Dominic not married, the cousin he described as brilliant but unprincipled, driven by ambition rather than integrity. I thought he was in Rome, Elena said carefully. He was. Now he's decided to grace us with his presence. Dominic's voice carried an edge of sarcasm. Antonio has always been curious about my personal life. And suspicious of your motives, Elena added, remembering what Dominic had told her about his cousin's persistent questions regarding their sudden marriage. Dominic nodded, his dark eyes scanning the grounds where Sophia was now dismounting her horse. He'll likely try to speak with you alone. Be careful what you say to him. The warning sent a chill through Elena. Should I be worried? Just cautious, Dominic replied, but something in his expression made Elena wonder if he was withholding concerns. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched Sophia below. Elena had been surprised by how naturally Dominic had taken to her daughter's presence in his home. Though initially awkward, he had shown unexpected patience with Sophia's questions, arranged for the best tutors when she struggled with math, and even attended her school science fair without Elena having to ask. She looks like you, Dominic observed, nodding toward Sophia. Everyone says she's the image of her father, Elena replied automatically. Around the eyes, perhaps, Dominic conceded. But her spirit, that determination, that's all you. The unexpected personal observation caught Elena off guard. In their 3 months of marriage, Dominic had maintained a careful distance, revealing little of himself beyond what was necessary for their arrangement. These glimpses of something more personal always left her feeling unbalanced. "Thank you for the riding lessons," she said, changing the subject. "They've been good for her." Dominic's phone chimed with a message. He checked it, his expression darkening slightly. "I need to handle this. We'll continue our discussion about the Milano visit at dinner." With a nod, he turned and left the balcony, already dialing a number on his phone. Elena watched him go, wondering not for the first time about the parts of his life he kept carefully separated from hers. Despite living in his home and bearing his name, there were doors, literal and figurative, that remained firmly closed to her. The Milano delegation arrived the following afternoon in a procession of black luxury vehicles. Elena stood beside Dominic in the grand foyer, dressed in an elegant cream dress that his personal shopper had selected, feeling like an actress stepping onto a stage. The visitors were a study in contrasts, elderly men with weathered faces and calculating eyes, accompanied by much younger assistants who carried themselves with the watchful readiness Elena had come to recognize in Dominic's security team. They greeted Dominic with a mix of deference and familiarity, switching effortlessly between English and Italian. And then there was Antonio Blackwood. Where Dominic was all controlled power and understated authority, his cousin exuded charisma and charm. Slightly shorter but equally fit, with the same dark eyes but a ready smile that Dominic rarely displayed, Antonio moved through the room like a politician working a crowd. "So this is the woman who tamed my cousin's heart," Antonio said when he reached Elena, taking her hand and brushing his lips across her knuckles, in a gesture that felt both old-world and slightly inappropriate. "The mysterious Elena we've all been so curious about." "Hardly mysterious," Elena replied with a practiced smile, gently reclaiming her hand. "Just private." Antonio's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Privacy is a luxury in our family. Wouldn't you agree, Dominic?" He turned to his cousin without waiting for Elena's response. "One I intend to preserve," Dominic replied smoothly, placing a possessive hand at the small of Elena's back. The gesture was part of their public performance, but Elena couldn't help noticing how Antonio's gaze tracked the movement, his smile never reaching his eyes. The afternoon unfolded with precision, following the agenda Richards had reviewed with Elena that morning. A tour of the estate grounds for the visitors, followed by drinks on the terrace, all building toward the formal dinner where the real business would be discussed. Eleanor played her role perfectly, asking the right questions, showing appropriate interest in the visitors' families, and maintaining the fiction of a woman deeply in love with her husband. It was during dessert that the first hint of trouble surfaced. "Your marriage was quite unexpected, Dominic," said Giorgio Vitelli, the eldest of the Milano delegation, his English heavily accented but precise. "After so many years of bachelorhood, we had almost given up hope of seeing the Blackwood legacy continued. When you find the right person, why wait?" Dominic replied, reaching for Eleanor's hand across the table in a display that would have seemed genuine to anyone who didn't know the truth. "Indeed," Antonio interjected, swirling his wine glass thoughtfully. "Though I can't help wondering about the timing, just months before grandfather's deadline." His smile was friendly, his tone light, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Elena felt Dominic's fingers tighten almost imperceptibly around hers. "Fortune favors the prepared," Dominic responded smoothly. "Speaking of which, shall we move to the study to discuss the Palermo expansion?" The men rose, leaving Elena and the few other wives present to retire to the drawing room. As Elena stood, Antonio appeared at her side. "Might I have a word in private, cousin?" he asked, his use of the familial term a pointed reminder of her new status. Before she could respond, Dominic was beside them. "My wife has been feeling unwell today," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "Perhaps another time, Antonio." Antonio's smile didn't falter. Of course, family comes first, after all. The exchange left Elena unsettled as she excused herself. claiming a headache to avoid further social obligations. In the sanctuary of her suite, she kicked off her heels and tried to make sense of the undercurrents she'd witnessed at dinner. Dominic had briefed her extensively on each visitor, but something about Antonio's interest in her felt more personal than professional. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting Dominic, she was surprised to find Antonio standing in the hallway, a decanter and 2 glasses in hand. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his charming smile firmly in place. "I thought perhaps a nightcap might help with your headache. I appreciate the thought, but—" "Please," Antonio interrupted, his voice dropping lower. "What I have to say concerns your daughter's safety." Elena's blood ran cold. "Excuse me? May I come in? I promise this conversation is in your best interest." Every instinct warned against allowing him into her private space, but the mention of Sophia overrode her caution. She stepped aside, leaving the door conspicuously open. Antonio set the decanter down on the small table near the window, but didn't pour. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into with my cousin," he said without preamble, his charm replaced by something more urgent. "This marriage, it's not what you think." "I'm not sure what you mean," Elena replied carefully. "Dominic is using you," Antonio said bluntly. "Once he secures grandfather's holdings, you'll be discarded. It's his pattern." "You don't know anything about our relationship," Elena countered, maintaining their cover story despite her growing unease. Antonio's laugh was hollow. "Don't I? Did he tell you about Isabella or Christine?" He moved closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The women who came before you?" Elena kept her expression neutral, through years of practice hiding her emotions from bill collectors and unsympathetic bosses. "My husband's past relationships are not your concern." "They become your concern when history repeats itself," Antonio insisted. "Isabella was found dead in her apartment 2 weeks after Dominic ended things. Christine disappeared entirely." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small flash drive. "The truth about the man you married is all here. For your daughter's sake, you should know who you're living with." Elena stared at the flash drive, her mind racing. "Why would you share this with me?" Antonio's expression softened into something that might have been genuine concern. "Because, unlike my cousin, I don't believe in collateral damage. You seem like a good person, Elena. You and your daughter deserve better than being pawns in the Blackwood family game." Before she could respond, a shadow darkened the doorway. Dominic stood there, his face a mask of controlled fury, as he took in the scene before him. "Antonio," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "I believe you've lost your way to the guest wing." Antonio straightened, slipping the flash drive back into his pocket with a casual gesture. "Just checking on our newest family member. We Blackwoods should look after each other, shouldn't we?" The tension between the 2 men was palpable as Antonio moved toward the door. He paused beside Dominic, saying something in Italian too low for Elena to hear, before continuing down the hallway. Dominic remained in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What did he say to you?" Elena hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "He suggested our marriage might not be what it seems. Antonio has always been jealous of what he can't have," Dominic replied, his voice tight. "He mentioned women named Isabella and Christine," Elena pressed, watching Dominic's reaction carefully. "He implied something happened to them after their relationships with you ended." Something flashed in Dominic's eyes. Not guilt, but a cold anger that made Elena step back instinctively. "My cousin has always excelled at manipulation. You'd do well to remember that." "Then tell me the truth," Elena challenged, her concern for Sophia overriding her usual caution. "Who were they?" For a long moment Dominic was silent, seeming to debate with himself. Finally he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Isabella was my fiancée 6 years ago," he said, his voice flat. "She died of a drug overdose after our engagement ended. The police ruled it accidental, but Antonio has always implied otherwise." "And Christine?" Dominic's jaw tightened. "Christine Velluti was an undercover federal agent who infiltrated my organization 3 years ago. When her cover was blown, she disappeared into witness protection." His dark eyes locked with Elena's. "Contrary to what Antonio implied, I was the one who arranged her safe extraction when her handlers abandoned her." Elena stared at him, trying to reconcile this new information with the man she'd lived alongside for 3 months. "Why would he tell me this?" "Because Antonio wants what I have," Dominic said simply. and he's willing to use you to get it. He moved closer, his expression softening slightly. Elena, I've kept certain aspects of my business separate from our arrangement to protect you and Sophia, but perhaps that was a mistake. What do you mean? The Milano delegation isn't just here to discuss legitimate business, Dominic admitted. They're concerned about a potential informant in our organization, someone feeding information to a rival family. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. And Antonio wants them to think it's me, Eleanor whispered, the realization dawning. Your mysterious new wife with no connections to your world, Dominic nodded grimly, which means you're now in danger from multiple directions. We need to adjust our arrangement. As the implications of his words sank in, Elena realized that their carefully constructed business deal had just evolved into something far more complicated and potentially deadly. The night air carried a distinct chill as Elena paced the length of her suite, processing Dominic's revelations. After explaining the danger she now faced, he had left her alone to consider their options, his final words lingering in the silence. This is no longer just business, Elena. We're in this together now. 3 hours had passed since then, and sleep remained elusive. The Milano delegation was scheduled to stay for 2 more days, leaving Elena trapped in a house with people who potentially viewed her as either a liability or a target. Antonio's warning echoed in her mind, impossible to dismiss entirely despite Dominic's explanations. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Opening the door, she found Dominic standing there, still dressed in the same clothes, though his tie was now completely gone and his collar unbuttoned. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice low enough not to carry down the hallway. Elena stepped aside, noting the unusual tension in his normally composed demeanor. "Is something wrong?" "Richards intercepted a call from one of Antonio's men," Dominic said without preamble as she closed the door. "They're planning to approach Sophia's school tomorrow." Fear gripped Elena's heart. "What? Why would they—" "Leverage," Dominic answered grimly. "Antonio is getting desperate. The delegation is close to finalizing the transfer of the Italian holdings to me." Elena sank onto the edge of her bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "We need to get her away from here. Already arranged," Dominic assured her, taking a seat in the armchair across from her. "Frank has prepared a safe house in Vermont. One of my most trusted security teams will take you both there tonight." "You're not coming with us?" Elena asked, surprised by the pang of disappointment that accompanied the question. Dominic shook his head. "I need to stay and conclude the business with the Milano delegation. If both of us disappear, it will only confirm their suspicions and potentially escalate the situation." His dark eyes met hers. "But I'll join you as soon as possible." Eleanor nodded, her mind already racing through practical considerations. "I'll need to pack some things for Sophia." "Already done," Dominic replied. "Richards helped your daughter pack for a surprise trip while you were at dinner. She's excited about the adventure." The thoughtfulness of this preparation caught Elena off guard. In the 3 months of their arrangement, she had come to respect Dominic's efficiency and integrity in business matters, but these glimpses of consideration toward Sophia still surprised her. "There's something else you should know," Dominic continued, his expression grave. "The flash drive Antonio offered you. It doesn't contain what he claimed." Eleanor frowned. "How do you know?" "Because I've been tracking Antonio's movements since before your marriage," Dominic admitted. "That drive contains malware designed to infiltrate my security systems once connected to any device in the house. So his concern for my safety was just another manipulation," Elena concluded, feeling foolish for having considered, even briefly, that Antonio might have been genuine. "Antonio has never shown concern for anyone but himself," Dominic said, a rare bitterness coloring his tone. "But his tactics tonight revealed something important. He's becoming reckless. That gives us an advantage." Elena studied Dominic's face, noting the subtle signs of exhaustion beneath his controlled exterior. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly see the man behind the business arrangement, not just the powerful figure who had offered her financial security, but someone fighting his own battles against shadows from his family's past. "I need to know the whole truth, Dominic," she said quietly, "not just about Antonio or the delegation, but about you, about what I've really married into." For a long moment, Dominic was silent, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees, in an uncharacteristically vulnerable posture. "My grandfather built the Blackwood Empire through means that were often brutal and rarely legal," he began, his voice low and measured. "My father continued that tradition. By the time I took control 10 years ago, our family name was synonymous with organized crime in certain circles, though we maintained a veneer of legitimacy." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I made a decision then to transform our business entirely, to cut ties with the criminal elements, to legitimize our operations completely. It's been a decade-long process, and not everyone in the family approved." "Antonio," Elena guessed. Dominic nodded. He saw my reforms as weakness, as betrayal of our heritage. While I was dismantling our connections to illegal activities, he was secretly maintaining them, building his own network within the shadows I was trying to leave behind. "Why not just cut him out entirely?" Elena asked. "Family loyalty runs deep in Italian business culture," Dominic explained, "especially with the older generation that controls many of our interests. Moving too quickly against Antonio would have alienated crucial allies." His expression hardened slightly, "But I've been gathering evidence of his independent operations for years." The Milano delegation's visit was meant to be the final step before presenting that evidence and removing him permanently. "And then I complicated things by falling asleep on your sofa," Elena said, with a hint of irony. To her surprise, Dominic's mouth curved into a genuine smile, the first she had seen from him. "Your timing was inconvenient, but not unwelcome. The marriage may have been arranged for practical reasons, but your presence here has been—" He hesitated, seeming to search for the right word. "Enlightening." Before Elena could ask what he meant, Dominic's phone chimed with a message. He checked it quickly, his expression shifting back to businesslike efficiency. "The car is ready," he said, standing. "You and Sophia need to leave immediately. The driver will take a circuitous route to ensure you're not followed. I've arranged for a private plane at a small airfield outside the city." Elena rose as well, suddenly reluctant to leave despite the danger. "How will you handle the delegation when they realize I'm gone?" "I'll tell them you took Sophia to visit your ailing mother," Dominic replied smoothly. "It's a plausible excuse that Antonio won't be able to disprove immediately." He walked to the door but paused with his hand on the knob. "Elena," he said, turning back to face her, "I want you to know that regardless of how our arrangement began, I would never allow any harm to come to you or Sophia. You have my word on that." The intensity in his eyes made something shift inside Elena. A realization that somewhere along the way, their business arrangement had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. She wasn't sure what to call it yet, but it felt dangerously close to trust. "I know," she said simply. Dominic nodded once, then opened the door. "Frank will meet you in the garage. Go now." The Vermont safe house was nothing like Elena had expected. Rather than a fortress-like compound, it was a charming lakeside cabin set among towering pines, isolated enough for privacy, but with the warmth of a well-loved vacation home. Sophia had fallen in love with it immediately, especially when she discovered the small boat dock and the collection of board games in the living room. 3 days had passed since their midnight departure from the Blackwood mansion. Dominic called each evening, his conversations with Elena brief and focused on security updates, though he always asked to speak with Sophia as well. Their conversations were stilted at first, but grew easier each time, with Sophia eagerly telling him about the deer she had spotted near the lake or the puzzle she had completed. On the 4th morning, Eleanor's phone rang with a call from a number she didn't recognize. "Eleanor Blackwood," she answered cautiously, still unused to using Dominic's surname. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is Richards," came the familiar voice of Dominic's house manager. "I'm calling from a secure line. There's been an incident at the estate." Eleanor's heart raced. "Is Dominic—" "Mr. Blackwood is alive," Richards assured her quickly, "but he's been injured. There was an altercation with Mr. Antonio last night after the Milano delegation departed." "How badly is he hurt?" Elena asked, moving away from the kitchen where Sophia was happily drawing. "A gunshot wound to the shoulder and some additional injuries," Richards replied, his usually formal tone tinged with genuine concern. "The doctors have treated him, but he refused to remain in the hospital. He's returning to the estate within the hour." "We'll come back immediately," Elena said without hesitation. "Mr. Blackwood expressly forbade that," Richards countered. "He insisted you and Miss Sophia remain at the safe house until he personally comes to retrieve you." "That's ridiculous," Elena protested. "If he's injured, he needs help, not stubborn pride." There was a pause on the line before Richard spoke again, his voice softer. "If I may speak frankly, Mrs. Blackwood, in the 10 years I've served Mr. Dominic, I've never seen him as concerned for anyone as he is for you and your daughter. His instructions were quite clear. Your safety comes first." The simple statement left Elena momentarily speechless. After thanking Richards and extracting a promise to call with updates, she ended the call and stood by the window, watching Sophia play outside with one of the security team members who had been teaching her to skip stones across the lake's surface. 3 months ago, Dominic Blackwood had been nothing more than a name associated with wealth and whispered rumors. Now he was the man who had created a new life for her daughter, who had shown unexpected kindness in small moments, who was apparently willing to take a bullet before risking their safety. The realization hit her with surprising force. Somewhere between their business arrangement and this moment, she had developed feelings for her husband of convenience. 2 days later, the sound of an approaching helicopter broke the afternoon quiet. Eleanor stepped onto the cabin's porch, Sophia beside her, as the sleek black aircraft landed in the clearing beyond the driveway. The moment the rotors slowed, the door opened, and Dominic emerged. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the sling supporting his left arm and the careful way he moved, but his stride was purposeful as he approached the cabin. Sophia, to Elena's surprise, broke into a run toward him, stopping just short of colliding with his injured side. "You're hurt!" she exclaimed, looking up at him with wide eyes. "It's nothing serious," Dominic assured her with a gentleness Elena had only glimpsed in rare moments. "Just a scratch that needs a few days to heal. Mom says when you get hurt, you need extra cookies to feel better," Sophia informed him solemnly. "We made chocolate chip ones yesterday." A hint of a smile touched Dominic's lips. "That sounds like excellent medicine." As they walked toward the cabin, Sophia chattering about their days at the lake, Elena watched the interaction with a tightness in her chest. When Dominic reached the porch steps, his eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. Relief, concern, and something deeper neither was ready to name. "Sophia, why don't you go get the cookie tin ready?" Elena suggested. "And maybe pour some milk." Once their daughter was inside, and Eleanor realized she had thought of Sophia as their daughter for the first time, she turned to Dominic. "Richards told me what happened. Antonio is no longer a concern," Dominic replied, his voice flat. "The evidence I gathered was enough to convince the Milano delegation of his betrayal. He's been removed from the family business entirely and left the country this morning." "Just like that?" Elena asked skeptically. Dominic's expression darkened slightly. "Not exactly. There was resistance on his part. Hence this." He nodded toward his injured shoulder. "But it's over now. You and Sophia can return home safely." Home. The word hung between them, laden with meaning neither had anticipated when they'd entered their arrangement. "And our marriage?" Elena asked quietly. "With Antonio gone and your inheritance secure, is there still a need for our arrangement?" Dominic studied her face for a long moment before responding. "That depends," he said finally, "on whether you still see it as merely an arrangement." Elena's heart quickened. "And if I don't?" Instead of answering, Dominic closed the distance between them, his right hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "I married you for practical reasons, Elena," he said, his voice low and intense. "But somewhere along the way, I found myself wondering what it would be like if it were real." "It feels pretty real to me," Elena whispered, surprising herself with her honesty. For the first time since she'd known him, Dominic's carefully maintained control slipped, revealing something raw and genuine in his expression. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened with months of unacknowledged tension. When they finally broke apart, Eleanor found herself breathless. "So what happens now?" "Now," Dominic said, taking her hand in his, "we decide what kind of marriage we really want, not for business, not for show, but for us." Before she could respond, Sophia's voice called from inside. "Mum, Mr. Dominic, the cookies are ready." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Dominic?" "She wasn't sure what to call you," Eleanor explained with a small smile. He seemed to consider this for a moment. "We should probably figure that out," he said softly. "Among other things." As they walked into the cabin hand in hand, Eleanor realized that their story had taken a turn neither of them had written into their original contract. What had begun as a business arrangement had transformed into a chance at something neither had been looking for, but both perhaps had needed all along. A family built not from obligation but from choice.